I am speaking to you from my sunroom at home in light of the fact that I am still in quarantine as a result of being exposed to the coronavirus. This is Maunday, Thursday, and I want to share with you some thoughts that Jesus shared with his disciples on Maunday, Thursday. Let me start by reading to you from John chapter 13, beginning in verse 31. Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify his Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I have told the Jews, I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus replied, where I am going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. And Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. It's the word of the Lord, and thanks be to God. God is sharing with us in his last days a commitment to love. There's a story about love. It was a young man. His name was Curtis. He worked as a stock boy in a grocery store. He got a call over the intercom. The receptionist asked him to come to aisle 4 and help with a carryout. As Curtis walked towards the aisle, he noticed that the clerk at that register was a new one, and a beautiful one, he thought. He decided then that he was going to get to know her better. That night, Curtis watched as she checked out and checked her time card. Her name was Brenda. The next night, when she checked out, Curtis was waiting for her and asked her if she would like a ride because he had seen her walk home the night before. Brenda accepted the ride, and when they got home, Curtis asked if it would be possible for them to see each other outside of work. Brenda said that wasn't possible. She could not afford a babysitter. Curtis said, that's no problem. I'll pay for the babysitter. With that understanding, Brenda said yes, and so Saturday night was the big date. But when Curtis arrived, the babysitter had not, and so Brenda said that she couldn't go. Curtis simply said, why don't we take the kids with us? Brenda again suggested that that was not possible. Curtis pushed a little bit, wanted to know why, and so she took him inside, and there he met her eldest daughter, a beautiful little girl, cute as a button, Curtis thought. And then Brenda rolled out in a wheelchair her son, who had Down syndrome and was paraplegic. Curtis looked at Brenda and said, well, I still don't understand why we can't take them with us. Brenda was shocked. No man had ever suggested that, not even the father of the children. So they loaded the kids into the car, and off they went to dinner and to a movies, and every time that the young man needed anything, Curtis would just take care of him, pick him up and carry him even to the bathroom or wherever he had to go. By the end of the night, Curtis had become endeared to them, and they endeared to him. And Brenda knew that this was the man that she really wanted to have as her husband. A few years later, that would become the case. And they were married, Mr. and Mrs. Kurt Warner. Kurt would go on and play football. He would be the quarterback for the St. Louis Rams, the New York Giants, and even the Arizona Cardinals. And in his 12-year career, he would be noted as one of the most valuable players. And his 12-year career would go down as being one of the most remarkable in NFL history. What made Curtis very special was his love. His love for anyone and everyone. His love for the children that belonged to Brenda that became his. The love for the children they would have later. You see, Curtis loved according to Jesus' command. He loved everyone, anywhere, anyway. Jesus was running out of time on that last Thursday night. He knew that his days, his time with his disciples were now coming to an end. This would be the very last night that he would be able to have them to speak to them privately. He wanted to make sure they were ready to carry on his task when he had left them. And he knew that who they were and how they acted would be determined by what they did. So he gave them a new command. He says, "A new command I give you, to love one another as I have loved you. You must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." One single act can and will broadcast the message, the message of the gospel to the world. It's spelled with 4 letters, L-O-V-E. Love is recorded more than 550 times in Scripture. And in every case, it is really summing down to the same thing. If you want to be a messenger of God, then you need to show your love by your actions, not just with your words. As a model of Christ-like love, we have to illustrate that day and night, because we are the models from which our children will get their habits. So was the case with a mother. When she came down one morning for breakfast, she found a little note beside her plate. It was written by her son Bradley. It says, "Mother owes Bradley for running errands 25 cents, for being good 10 cents, for music lessons 15 cents, and for all other things 5 cents. Total 55 cents. The mother took the note and stuck it in her pocket and smiled. At lunchtime, when Bradley arrived to get his meal, there the 55 cents sat beside his plate, but also with a note from his mother. The note read, "Bradley owes mother. For nursing him through scarlet fever, nothing. For being good to him, nothing. For clothing him, nothing. For his meals, nothing. Total, nothing." You see, to love one another as Christ loved us means that the total bill for anything and everything that we might do for another person is nothing. When asked, a little boy told a man that he loved his mother with all of his strength. The man asked him what that meant, and he explained that they live on a 4th floor in a tenement house, and there is no elevator. And in the wintertime, it gets cold, and they need coal to heat their stove. The coal is kept in the basement. And so the little boy will go down to the basement with the coal bucket and fill it up. He says it's a very big bucket and it's very heavy. And I will carry that all the way to the apartment for my mother. So my mother never is without coal to warm the house. And he asked the man, "Isn't that loving your mother with all of your strength?" The mother who charged her son nothing, the little boy who revealed the fact that he loves his mother with all of his strength, were keeping examples, were showing examples of Christ-like love. They were showing examples of Christ-like subservient love. At the very beginning of this chapter, John records that the disciples and Jesus arrived at the upper room. It was in a home where there should have been a servant waiting for them to wash their feet as they arrived. That was tradition in those days. But on this night, there was no servant. And none of the disciples were willing to assume that task. So our Lord Jesus Christ washed the feet of his disciples, demonstrating to them that that is love. It is subservient love. The tradition to love one another goes down to being a subservient lover. We in the church need to understand that. Sometimes we do a very good job of that. And other times we allow our own personalities and our own opinions, our own judgments to get in the way. So it was with a woman who had just gone through a very difficult divorce. She and her husband had broken up. She had lost custody of her child. And she was in desperate need of tender, loving support and care from her brothers and sisters in church. Instead, she often got a pointed finger and a frown as to how she could have ever let this happen. She would eventually leave the church, and she began frequenting bars. And one day her pastor stopped her and says, "Why are you doing this?" She says, "It's very simple. When I walk into a bar, they smile." Who are you and I to judge? Jesus says, "Love one another as I have loved you." No conditions, no qualifications. In 1912, Louis Laws assumed the responsibility for Sing Sing prison. At that time, considered to be one of the prisons that held the most dangerous men and women in the world. He and his family lived outside the prison gates. His wife, Catherine, and their 3 children were told never, ever to go inside those gates. But Catherine ignored the advice of others. And when the prison baseball games began, she was there in the bleachers with her 3 children beside the prisoners watching the game. When she found out that there were men who were hearing impaired, she taught them sign language. And when she found out there was a man who was blind, she learned Braille and then taught him Braille. For 16 years, Catherine Laws brought compassion and love into that prison, a prison full of many dangerous men. One day, the warden did not show up at his regular time. Immediately, the prisoners knew something was wrong. They would later find out that Catherine had been killed in an automobile accident that night before. The next day, when the assistant warden was making his rounds, he found many of the prisoners leaning against the front gates, looking out in total silence, tears coming down their eyes. And he made a decision, a remarkable decision that day. He said, "Okay, men, you can go and give your respects to the Law family, but you must return for check-in tonight." And they opened the gates and they allowed these many, many very dangerous prisoners to walk out unescorted without any guards. And each of them went and paid their respects to a woman who had shown them love. And every one of the men returned that night. The hardest criminals in the country brought to their knees in sorrow for the loss of one who showed nothing but love for them. You see, acts of love beget other acts of love. Jesus' life had been a continuous demonstration of love as he healed people, as he forgave people, as he brought in the least and the lowly people into his loving kindness and his loving crowd. He was special. He always showed that kind of love, regardless of the circumstances, even washing the feet of his disciples. And on this one last night, when they would be together, he fed them a meal that would reflect the loss of his blood and the brokenness of his body that would come in the coming days. It is to us a symbol of God's love for us. And in our faith tradition, we see it as a sign and the seal of God's love for each of us. The next day, Jesus would again show his love as he obeyed his Father and went to the cross. The Apostle Paul explains God demonstrates his own love for each of us, that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. We are unable on this Maunday, Thursday, to come to the Lord's table at his invitation and to receive his meal. But we will definitely do that as soon as we can. But we can do this. We can remember the significance of that meal. His broken body, his shed blood, introducing a new covenant of forgiveness for all who would follow him. And all he asks is we obey a commandment to be kind and to love. Love one another as I have loved you, he said. By this they will know that you are my disciples, if you will love one another. By God's grace, on this Maunday, Thursday, and the days that will follow, may we be obedient to his command.